them. And I remember spending time in the prayer chapel, just like on my knees praying that like God would just take away these feelings. I remember the isolation and the alienation and the fear that accompanied kind of this terrifying reality that there's something going on, and it was wrong.
Many Americans see a culture war going on in our country today, and some of the most contentious battles have been between religious groups and the LGBT community. That's where the Marin Foundation comes in. It's an organization dedicated to building bridges and promoting reconciliation. For more, let's welcome Andrew Marin, founder and president of the Marin Foundation. We also welcome Darren Calhoun, a friend and supporter of the foundation. And we welcome Reverend Jerome Adams, associate minister at the First Church of Deliverance in Chicago. Thank you all for being here today. Andrew, can you start us off by telling us how your foundation came into being and how it addresses this fairly important issue between the LGBT community and communities of faith?
Yeah, I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, in a very white, upper middle class neighborhood. I attended an Assemblies of God church there. I was very conservative growing up in my high school of 4,000 kids. There was no gay straight alliance. There were no out gay kids at the time that anybody knew. Ended up going to college on a baseball scholarship. And the summer after my freshman year in college, my best friend came out to me and told me she was a lesbian. And then the very next month, my other best friend came out to me again and she told me she was a lesbian. And then for the third consecutive month, my other best friend, and I've only had 3 best friends my whole life, so this is about
important relationship.
100% of all the people that I loved more than anybody. He came out to me, and we had been best friends since we were 7. So in those 3 consecutive months, my world was just rocked, and I didn't know what to do, and I didn't know how to react, and I didn't know how to relate how much I loved my best friends to what I had been brought up in within a conservative evangelical environment my whole life. And so I ended up moving into Boys Town, the gay neighborhood here in Chicago. And that's been about 10 and a half years ago. And I still live there today. And when I first moved in, my goal was just to listen and learn and figure out how to believe in God and live my faith and love my best friends. And about 5 years after that, I just kept hearing the same story over and over again from people in the neighborhood, which was I was raised in a church. I got kicked out of the church, or my family disowned me, or there's this big disconnect, and we came here to Boys Town, and now we don't want to have anything to do with your version of God. And for the first time, I realized that their pain was caused by people like me, white, straight, males, who could care less about them. And I just felt something needed to be done. And so that's really the beginning of what the Marin Foundation turned into today.
It's a fantastic mission. And how is that lived in nuts and bolts? How does the Marin Foundation address this issue through conversation and reconciliation? But what does it actually look like in the room when you get these groups together?
Yeah, number one, it's based incarnationally. I mean, Jesus' whole message in life was about coming here to earth and living among and being a part of. And so that's what we do. So we all live in the neighborhood, us that work for the foundation. And our strategic goal is to very intentionally partner with people and organizations on the left, partner with people and organizations on the right, and facilitate different discussions and dialogues, what we call our living in the tension gatherings. And they're based off of a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. He was locked up in a jail in Birmingham, Alabama in 1963. And in his letter, he said, "I'm not afraid of the word tension. I've earnestly opposed violent tension my whole life, but there's a type of constructive and nonviolent tension which produces growth." And for me, that really resonated because our culture today knows not what constructive tension looks like. Our culture today thinks that all tension is bad tension. It's too political and it's too divisive, and we just need to find a way through it. But yet, what he was saying is that there's a type of constructive tension when intentionally immersed within from people from all different shades. The growth that he's talking about is going to come. It just comes retrospectively after much time has been immersed in these places. And that's really what we're trying to facilitate, and that's what we're trying to see, is to bring together friends from the far left and the far right and the middle, and really live in this space of tension, recognizing our theological and social and political differences, and yet elevating the conversation enough that we can figure out a way forward to permeate culture and change the medium of engagement from this completely strange and disconnected back and forth throwing bombs, and there's no dialogue and there's no love. And for us, reconciliation means being the constant pursuer of that which is disconnected. And so that's what we're trying to move forward in.
That's fantastic. Darren, how have you and the other supporters of the Marin Foundation come behind this mission and facilitated this idea of living in that tension and fostering new growth from it?
In a lot of ways, it starts off with having your own story. For me personally, I was looking for a place to just have some support as I went to my church. And my church didn't have resources, didn't have support for somebody who was same-sex attracted and trying to figure out, what does God want me to do with my life? And so they kind of handed me off to the Marin Foundation, and I found that I suddenly had an advocate, somebody who understood all of the complexities, but who wasn't trying to tell me, this is what your faith says and this is what you're supposed to do. And so what I interestingly enough met was Christians and non-Christians who were in all kinds of places on these issues. Instead of the monolithic voice of my previous pastors going, well, this is what you have to do, I heard people sharing different stories and just talking about where they were and how they arrived at where they were. And I found it to be so much more enlightening and so much more useful than just these black and white answers that I'd been given in the past.
Those are important answers to come up with. Reverend Adams, how are foundations like the Marin Foundation and other groups fostering a new dialogue in African American churches, and how has your work facilitated that as well?
Well, I wish I could say that a whole lot of dialogue was taking place in the African American church, but it is not. It's a totally different culture when it comes to the LGBT and Q issue. Having grown up in a church for many years that welcomed and actually allowed gay people to worship openly and be who they were without judgment, was a different experience than most people having in the African American church. But we didn't take the next step, and that is affirming individuals who are LGBT and Q. And that kind of brings about a disconnect. There's still the issue of denying or having to deny one's own identity. Even though you're welcomed and you can worship openly, if you're not affirmed in who you are, you lack some of the necessary tools that it takes to carve out your own identity in the world.
Absolutely, and this seems like the crux of this matter, that there is this sense on one side of this debate that the LGBT community is inherently doing something that is negative or sinful, and on the other side of the discussion is a group of people saying, hey, this is who I am, this is how I choose to live my life, and I'm not hurting anyone by doing this. So how have you, Andrew, addressed that? It would seem like a pretty cavernous divide between those two sides.
Yeah, no, and it is, and that's really the crux of the whole disconnect. If you think about it from a broader cultural engagement perspective, what is happening within these two communities is that they're both working off of what I call a conversion-based model of engagement, which says my baseline moral, social, and ethical framework is better than yours. And so therefore, it is my job to either convince you that I'm right or you're wrong so you can come to my side and we'll be okay, or if you don't believe that I'm right and you're wrong, it is then my job to isolate you down and pin you down enough that you just become irrelevant. Both sides are doing this. They're doing it religiously, they're doing it politically, they're doing it socially, and a society cannot continue to move forward and advance in any peaceful or productive ways when two opposing communities that are fighting to dictate cultural normalcy, their only thought process is, I need to be the winner, and I need to be at the top of the cultural hierarchy chain. And now the problem has been, is that conservative religious entities have indeed been the ones that have been at the top of the cultural hierarchy chain for so long. And what they have done, they've taken that power and they've asserted that dominance in a not correct fashion. And they've asserted that dominance to say you're wrong and you're bad and you need to change and you're not worthy and you have no dignity and I'm not going to validate you. That's not a correct way to live out a belief system. So we're really first trying to move forward within the evangelical world, within the conservative faith world. It doesn't really matter which faith, but move forward in those worlds to say that's not what the Holy Scriptures teach about how to relate and engage with people. And then from the other perspective within the LGBT world to say you have been wronged and here we can help change that medium of engagement off of I need to convert people to believe how I believe and onto what does it mean to work together within this diverse, pluralistic, postmodern culture that we live in.
Thank you, Reverend Adams, Darren, and Andrew for being here today and sharing your work with us. I'm Bo River. For Different Drummers and the Greater Chicago Broadcast Ministries, keep the faith.